Hi, everybody. I know you're all muted, but we could wave. So wonderful to see so many healthy, happy miracles looking at me today. We're going to talk about feelings. You know, feelings, and some of the stuff I'm going to say may just tick you off a little bit. But in order to be your mentor, I guess sometimes I have to be your tormentor. Feelings are not facts, but they are information. They tell us what we're experiencing, how we interpret things that come at us. Quite often, though, we have a tendency to judge our feelings, or other people judge our feelings, and feelings need not be judged. Because we don't have any choice over the thoughts that come into our mind, over the initial feelings that we experience. However, we can learn to manage our feelings so that they don't manage us. So when we think about how do we learn to manage our emotions, what comes to my mind often are pilots who sit in simulators to practice situations that are life-threatening in order to stay calm, or 911 operators who spend so much time rehearsing and preparing so that when they have an emergency on the line, they don't panic along with the person that they're trying to save. You know, when you were in Shannon's, maybe some of you had attended Shannon's codependency lecture not too long ago, she talked about the fact that a lot of times we're not really allowed to experience our own emotions. We feel what we're taught to feel, or what we observe when someone else is feeling something. And the question that comes to my mind then is, what were we allowed to feel? Was there only one person in your household maybe that had permission to be angry? In my household, it was my dad. My dad was the only one that was allowed to be angry, and that was all there was to it. And you know, we also tend to express our emotions in very different ways based on our culture, our gender, our family of origin issues, trauma, addiction, all that jazz. So when we think about emotions and we think about feelings, we always look at what is the goal here. And the goal is to have some level of emotional intelligence. So anthropologists did studies all over the world, and they identified what they called 6 primary emotions. Now, those of you that may have attended some of my lectures know that I sometimes come up with, hey, there's only 2 really trunk emotions, love or fear. Love is all those positive things that we experience: enjoyment, satisfaction, serenity, hope, kindness. Fear, all of those negative things that we experience: fear of getting something I don't want, not getting something I want, losing something, somebody not liking me, not being able to control a situation. But we know that that's an oversimplification. According to the anthropologists, they identified 6 very specific primary emotions that are expressed throughout the world in the same way and are recognizable through physiological expression. So I know that you guys all have mute on there, but I'm hoping that maybe someone would be willing to unmute for a second and tell me what they think those 6 emotions might be. Anybody but Denny.
Fear, anger, joy, love. Oh, that's all I got.
That's great. That's great. Reed, would you care to put up a face for us? The one with the face, the circles faces? We're going to screen share. They are anger, disgust, enjoyment, which equals happy, fear, sadness, and surprise. So I know that I'm the only one that's being recorded here, but I would appreciate it if all of you would go along with me and let's have an angry face. Because I can see some of you. Now, What about a fear face? Sadness? Surprise? Or maybe enjoyment? Sometimes what happens is our whole body gets involved in the expression of emotion. So fortunately, Reed has agreed to do the screen sharing for me so that I don't get it all mixed up and you're not terribly inconvenienced. So if we look at our whole body coming into the expression of emotion, it looks like this next slide. Anybody identify with any of those things? I know I
Yeah.
I
certainly.
definitely do.
Yeah. Yeah. And what happens is we move on to the next slide. We think about things as kind of black and white, like I'm dressed in black and white, but emotions are not black and white. And they come in all kinds of degrees. And although this particular diagram shows a few more than just the 6 emotions, you can see where if we look at annoyance, it turns into anger and then into rage. And as we look at things and their intensity, serenity, joy, ecstasy, it's valuable, in my opinion, to keep in mind that the more intense our emotions are, the less able we are to manage them or to interrupt the process of reacting to them. So the question is, do I want to be a person that reacts to my emotion, or do I want to be a person that chooses a response? Because, show us the next slide if you would, please. This is what usually happens, right? The emotions get all jumbled up. We may have a combination of surprise and happiness if we walk into a room and we've got a birthday present. We may have a jumble of surprise and fear if we see a spider. So we'll look at the last slide now. Because what happens is emotions originate in our limbic system. And the limbic system it reacts to some sort of stimuli that comes at us. And then 2 things happen. One, an immediate message is sent to our hindbrain to determine whether or not there's fear. I see something long on the floor and I wonder, is it a snake? But a second message that runs a little slower goes to my frontal cortex and I realize it's a piece of rope. So it isn't something that I need to be afraid of. The problem is that we often forget to take that time to pause, to recognize what we feel, and to give ourselves an opportunity to think through a response, and we have to live with the consequences of a reaction. Thank you, Reed. We don't have any more slides to share, so now you're going to get to look at me. So when we think about how do we manage those emotions, how do we first recognize what we feel without judgment? Because a lot of us, I know certainly me, spent a lot of time being mad at myself for whatever I was feeling. And I blamed other people for my feelings. When I was a child, I had no control and I didn't know how to even understand what I was feeling. Toward the end of my active addiction, I didn't use to feel better. I just wanted to feel different because I didn't know how to manage any emotions at all. I didn't know how to recognize them. I was brought up in an environment where when I misbehaved, I was told to go sit in a chair and think about what I did. Nobody ever told me to go sit in a chair and feel about what I did. Recognizing emotion and learning how to manage them was not part of my lifestyle. Wasn't anything that was considered even. And I certainly didn't have permission to have my own set of emotions. We work really hard here at Pavillon on helping us recognize the triggered state and develop strategies to manage that triggered state. And quite often what we do is we look at people, places, and things. And we say, okay, well, when so-and-so says this to me, I feel that. And then we want to blame them. And we go, you made me feel mad when you hollered at me. Now, a couple things have happened. One, whomever it was that was hollering at me, I've just told them what to do to make me mad. I've put myself in the role of a victim because I'm powerless. I can't help it. You made me mad. But most of all, I've made an inaccurate statement. Because the fact of the matter is, nobody can make me mad without my permission. I choose to react to a situation because I've given someone else control over my emotions and ultimately sometimes over my behavior. It's like I give them a remote control with lithium batteries in it, and they push one button and I get happy, and they push another button and I get sad, and they push another button and I feel lonely. If I could just take the remote back and pull out the batteries and give it to them and let them push buttons all day long and learn that I'm the one that gets to choose how I respond, how I interpret. Do I take information in from an objective standpoint and say, this is information, not this is bad? So many of us growing up have been told that whatever we were feeling was bad. I don't care much for that word. It's non-productive. The truth of the matter is, if I can recognize what's happening to me emotionally, it's important to know what the triggers are. Yes, I get that. And I don't minimize that at all. We need to know what high-risk situations are. We need to have plans. We need to protect ourselves and all of that. But a lot of times what happens is a situation is presented to me, and as a result of that situation, I have an emotional response. And unless I can learn what my emotional response is, how am I supposed to learn how to manage that emotion? To illustrate that, I'm going to use one of the examples that we have here at Pavillon. We have a whole lot of assignments, and in extended care, we have some very intense assignments. And one of them is the triggers assignment. And in that assignment, we ask our patients to identify these 6 emotions and to fill out a chart that says, what is my physical response? What is my mental response? What am I saying to myself? What is, if I'm angry, is my physical response I clench my jaw or I make fists? Is my mental response some sort of internal dialogue hollering at someone else and blaming them for my feelings? Then I need to know, what does my disease say? Does my disease say, I don't deserve to be talked like this? Or of course I do, that's all I deserve. I got to get high so that I can change the way I feel. And what have I done in the past? How have I managed my emotions ineffectively in the past? And of course, because we want healing, we want to know, how would I like to manage them moving forward? And we look at that for each of the emotions that we can identify. So I encourage you to do that, to take a moment and recognize, okay, this is what I'm feeling. I don't really know what it is yet. All I know is that I'm feeling something, and it isn't serenity. Give yourself just a moment to take a breath, and then allow your frontal cortex to engage, because the more intense the feeling is, the more difficult it is for our brain to think about how to handle it. Because we feel like we're in self-preservation mode if it's a negative emotion. And if it's a positive emotion, sometimes, you know, as people with addiction, we like some feelings better than others. And we chase after the ones that we like the best. It may be that I'm feeling happy and I want to intensify that. So let's celebrate with a little more this or that. If we give ourselves just a moment of time to recognize that I don't have control over my thoughts that come into my mind, but I can learn how long I allow them to stay. I don't have control over my initial reaction, the way my filter responds to stimuli that's coming at me. But if I can remind myself that this is just information, and I get to choose how I process that information, what kind of tools I have at my disposal to manage this information and determine how I want to respond to it so that I have input into the consequences of my actions. So that I don't have to keep putting things on my 8-step list to make amends for, because I was watching this crazy person go off on somebody else and finding out that that crazy person was me. Once I identify what it is that I'm experiencing, and I can think about what strategies do I have? Do I use ABCD sheets? That's a very good practice model, like the pilot that landed on the Hudson River. He spent hundreds and probably thousands of hours in simulators. And if anybody heard that tape, he sounded so calm. He landed, saved the lives of himself and everybody else because he'd spent so much time practicing and becoming familiar with the adrenaline rush that he experiences in a crisis. And that's what we do. More and more, if we can recognize what the emotion is, and we can develop just a couple of strategies for whatever the feeling is that we have experienced most often that threatens our recovery the most, if we can just find 2 or 3 things, a go-to strategy. For me, I grew up in a pretty strict home. Let me leave it like that. I'm grateful for some of the lessons, not crazy about some of the teaching methods. So I know that there's part of me that is still incredibly sensitive to certain things. And I'm not always good at being objective or being distant or just taking it in as information without experiencing intense emotion. And so I have to sometimes just stop and tell my brain to be quiet for a minute, because my limbic system is shooting messages to my hindbrain that says, I have to do this in order to stay safe. I go into such a defense mode that I'm defending myself when I'm not even being attacked. One of my colleagues says, don't defend yourself unless you're in court, and then let a lawyer do it for you. On a personal note, I have a daughter. My daughter's 47 now, and she was 17 when I came into recovery. And I'm grateful that she's a much better mother than I was. But I didn't understand. It didn't take the time to sit down and listen to her experience with my addiction. Her memory of her childhood is very different than my memory of her childhood. And that's the case with everyone. Our memories are more like clay than concrete, and they mold and they shift. And every time we revisit a memory, we change it just a little bit. But when I was able to just sit down with her and say to her, please tell me what your experience was. And I will tell you, I had to chew on my tongue because it was uncomfortable. But I did not defend myself. I only listened. Information came in. I felt profoundly sad. Then I felt compassion. And then I felt hope. Because as we had the conversation, we were able to share not only what she was angry about and what I was angry about, but what we were both afraid of and what we wanted. And it wasn't until we recognized that we needed to stay connected with each other in the conversation before we could experience the emotions in a safe way. Because I care too much about her to fight with her. But I for years felt like I had to defend myself and justify my behavior. I don't do that anymore. I'm grateful that I have a higher power and a strong support system. And a lot of you know I have a sponsor named Olga. She's still alive and kicking. And I have a very close relationship with her, and I depend on her a great deal. And so sometimes I have to call her and I have to process what I'm feeling, even though it isn't the feeling that I want to hold on to for an extended period of time. I can get angry because anger is a natural emotion. I can be sad and know that I don't have to run from that emotion. It's okay to sit down for a minute and be sad. In fact, I'm grateful that recovery has taught me that I can have one of these negative emotions. I can be disgusted with a situation or with someone else's behavior and know that my Father's voice comes into my head. I will not condemn you for what you do, but I may not condone it in myself. I'm not responsible for what anybody else does. I'm only responsible for how I respond to it or how I react to it. And I have to live with those consequences. So when we talk about emotions, if we can recognize that things that we are exposed to will trigger us. Listening to a song may take me back to my first concert with Leonard Skinner or my last concert with Grateful Dead. I know why they called us deadheads. So as I think about emotion, and this is just in the world according to Candace, I need to know what the triggers are, and I need to know how to protect myself from high-risk situations and difficult environments. And sometimes I have to love people from afar and all of that jazz. But if I can identify what it is, what emotion it is that I'm experiencing behind the trigger, then I can develop a tool that I can use to be able to manage that emotion so that my recovery isn't in danger, so that I don't create conflict in relationships, so I don't regret behaviors that I demonstrate, so that I'm not consumed with shame and guilt. So at this point in time, I'm going to evoke an emotion. For some of you, it may be a happy emotion. For some of you, you may get a little ticked off. I don't know. Some of you already know. I have resigned from Pavillon, and my last day here will be the 25th of March. I will be going into private practice part-time because these 53-hour work weeks are getting to me. And the plan was always to retire when I turned 70. And I'm going to be turning 70 before the end of this month. So for those of you, and Reed was kind enough to allow me to make that announcement here, for those of you that email me to get angel cards, you're going to have to email me at another location after the 25th of March. My email address will simply be candacechampagne@gmail.com. Jim, who is my husband, has been excited in this process. He's acquired a web designer and has bought a domain. So champagnecounseling.com will be in the works at some point in the next several months. But make no mistake, I'm going to be on hiatus for a month or so. So we're looking at possibly, hi Beth, we're looking at possibly sometime in May. So when we think about emotions, what I'd like to do at this point is just invite everybody to speak up, questions, conversation, anything at all. Part of the reason for having this workshop is because I'm probably going to cry, so deal with it. So many of us have really severe abandonment issues. Some of you send me emails periodically, ask for an angel card, or just shoot me a picture. I recently got pictures of twins. And I did not want to leave and have anyone send an email looking for an angel card and feel abandoned by me. That's not okay. Because we can't do this alone, but together we recover, right? So now, just as an example, because I can't sit in this emotion, I can feel it, but I can't sit there. One of my strategies is I do my times tables in my head. It forces oxygenated blood to my frontal cortex, and it settles me down. So, you know, since I'm really bad at math, because I have an MSW, math skills waived, I can just do 3 times 3 is 9, and I'm pretty much okay. Oh, you honor me. Thank you very much. I'm so glad you're here and doing well. You know, I think it's really hard for us to give ourselves permission to feel, because I don't know about anybody else, but I used to be afraid that I couldn't survive the feeling. I didn't know how. And I felt guilty if I got mad, or I felt there was something wrong with me if I was sad. And today I know that those are all natural. In fact, they are so primary that all across the world, anthropologists studied facial expressions and body language and came up with what we showed you in cartoons. I chose cartoons over humans just because they're more fun. But that, I think we all deserve to give ourselves permission to experience our emotions. Sometimes we have to put ourselves in a safe place to do that. That's all. Yeah. And I'm glad Pavillon was a safe place for all. Everyone has to learn in their own way. So I don't live with the consequences of your choices. But for me, there are some losses that we just don't get over, we learn to live with. And the more I am able to stay present in this moment only, and sometimes I spend an extended period of time reciting that first stanza of the Serenity Prayer and ask myself, which part of that isn't working for me? Am I struggling with knowing the difference between what I can change and what I can't? Do I need to go to my higher power to accept the things I can't change? Do I have the courage to change everything that I'm capable of changing? And if not, what do I need to do to get that? For me in recovery, and I've got a little over 28 years now, the most difficult thing to do is to stay present in this moment only. And it is where the greatest freedom comes. So that's all that I can tell you from my own personal experience. Yeah, looking someone in the eye and saying, I love you too much to fight with you is the hard thing to do. And quite often early in recovery, our family members don't know whether it's real or not. And so they're going to try to push our buttons to see whether or not we're going to fall apart, to see whether or not we're going to be able to manage the stressors of life. And if that's the way we've been behaving and the way the pattern within the family has existed for so long, we remember that we didn't get this way overnight. We're not going to get cured overnight. And sadly, with this disease, we never get cured. So my experience with other people has been, sometimes it's very challenging because they don't know what to expect. They don't know how to interpret us, just like we didn't know how to understand their perspective when they were angry with us because of our behaviors. And so empathy, in my opinion, is always the key in a situation like that, being able to look someone in the eye and say, I love you, but I can't have this conversation. And how we say that, if I say to you, I don't like the way you talk to me, I've just picked a fight. But if I say, I'm uncomfortable being called names, I've just identified my emotion, and the other person gets to decide whether or not they've called me names. I'm uncomfortable raising my voice, then I give myself permission to be quiet. It's very difficult when the person who hollers the loudest wins the argument. And that's been the pattern in our home life and our family of origin. And for us to come in a soft-spoken way and say, no, I care too much about you to continue the patterns that we have spent our lives expressing, and I'm learning how to do something different. I'm sorry if that's uncomfortable for you, And then, I mean, we try not to say this, but we do need to know that we're not responsible for somebody else's feelings any more than they are responsible for ours. Sometimes that makes them very unhappy. So my suggestion, if you're open to a suggestion, is to just keep being you and grow in recovery and feel comfortable with you and give yourself permission to say, I'm not going to have this conversation right now. I have a sign early in recovery. One side of it said, I'm not available. And the other side of it said, I'm uncomfortable with this conversation because I couldn't trust myself to open my mouth. I had to just hold a sign up in front of my face because they were new skills that I didn't know how to practice. I am not available. I'm uncomfortable with this conversation was my broken record statement for a long time. It's amazing what we learn to survive in recovery, isn't it? And then we get to carry that message. 3 people most important when we come in: that person that comes in ahead of us that can show us the way, the one that comes in at the same time that can identify, and the one that comes in behind us that we get to help along. On honor, Rusty, really. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for choosing recovery. Thank you for carrying the message, for showing up every day, for doing the hard work, for never giving up on yourselves or each other. Thank you all. Because I can't stop. You know, that's not possible, because I have a higher power that tells me that to go do this, go do that. And I have a deal with him. See, the deal is, if this is not where I'm supposed to go, block the road. If it's where I'm supposed to go, pave the way. And so that's the arrangement I have with my higher power. And hopefully he'll pave the way to a little bit of income from a private practice. But right now I'm at Pavillon for the next 3 weeks, and it's such an honor to have been part of Pavillon. It's an amazing place. There's no place like it. I've worked with several agencies, and there's just no place like this. It's holistic, it's permanent, it's lifelong, and it is a safe place for all of us to grow and heal. So, yeah, I will miss it very much. Before we close, though, can I pick us an angel card? Just one card for everybody? Oh man, you're not going to believe this. Adventure. How cool is that? The angel is dressed in a light blue gown with gold wings. She's got it's got a walking stick, and it's headed out. So isn't that what we all do in recovery each day? We get up in the morning, we ask our higher power to help us stay in recovery, and we go about the business of having a new adventure.